All right, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Emily Counts. I'm the Community Advancement Coordinator here at ACCE. For those of you just joining us, we're going to go ahead and get started now that we are 4 minutes past the hour. So thank you so much for joining this webinar on the fundamentals of development with our very special guest, David Rattray. First, all attendees are in listen-only mode, but we welcome your questions. You can either type your question into the question or chat panel or raise your hand and I will unmute you. So, those are a couple of our housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the ACCE website along with all materials. And without further ado, we're going to get started. So today's presenter is David Rattray. David is the Executive Vice President for the Center of Education Excellence and Talent Development at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and President of Unite LA. He's the Center of Education Excellence and Talent Development at the Chamber and serves as the President of Unite LA, the school to career of Los Angeles. Rattray officially joined the Chamber in 2003 after being a strategic partner for several years. And when Rattray really wants to shine, he plays his tuba. But without further ado, I will let David begin.
Your patience and welcome to all of you. And so now the concert is going to begin. I'm going to start with my first tuba solo. Just kidding. But Emily's not kidding. I actually do play the tuba. I, in fact, love playing on the weekends. Let me just set this up a little bit. I'm going to give you a tiny bit of my background that beyond what you saw. I had a private sector career for 20 years, and I got to retire at a young age and support education. In the last 14 years, the organization I lead, Unite LA, has become part of the LA Chamber. And with that, I'm pretty comfortable and used to the idea of trying to be a rainmaker and trying to go find funds and build resources. So today's an effort to sort of share with you some of the things we've learned and stimulate conversation. Again, throughout, as Emily said, throughout this whole webinar, we'd love to have conversation. So feel free to pose your questions. I'll be trying to watch the chat box, and Emily will prompt me as well. And also, I just want to give a little context of the LA work. I know for a lot of you, you might be in smaller communities and sort of think, oh, you know, LA is so big and of course doesn't relate or isn't relevant to some of our work. I just want to give you rest assured that when we started this work here at the LA Chamber, we had less than one full-time equivalent working on education and no dedicated funding whatsoever. So we started from zero as well. We have a larger market, obviously, so maybe there's more resources in terms of order of magnitude, but the relative competition is equal to that and same as yours. So we have the same sort of chase and challenge that you would have in any size community, and we started from zero. Our biggest goal really, and what we'll share with you today, is to see if we could build what we call non-traditional revenue. So revenue that the C6, the main chamber, LA Chamber, was not already getting from membership or sponsorship. So that's the main thrust of today. We'll be talking about how we went about trying to get new revenue outside of the normal revenue that the LA Chamber was already achieving. And the other thing I would say, just to set this up, is what was crucial to me and to us is to think about our work as a profit center. And that's me using my old corporate terms, but the point being that our goal is to bring new money in and to fund ourselves, fund our own work, and ideally even more than fund the work. So there's a net benefit to the C6. The corollary is if the C6 sees us as a cost center and then mostly it has to fund it, it's always going to limit the work. And that's what we didn't want to see. We wanted to have so robust of a funding stream that we could drive the work over time and sustain it and build it. So that's our mentality. And I thought it was just helpful for you to see how we sort of approach the question. So next slide, Emily. So this next slide is what we call the stages of development, and it just helps us think about all the different stages you have to go through to be successful, to raise money and to get refunded. And what's really important about this is oftentimes we just think about that fourth stage of the proposal, and we slip into the idea that really this is about writing grants. And what we had to learn is that was actually the fourth step, and in some ways the easiest and least important. The first three steps were the most difficult and the most important to learn and get better at. So going through these steps, they're pretty obvious, but they're very significant. The first being doing the research, trying to find out who's out there and do we have a reasonable chance of getting funding from them, and do they fund the kind of stuff we do? So doing the research is super critical and not easy, and it's hard work and time consuming, and often leads to dead ends, and it's important to be okay with that. So in a sense, we're over-researching in terms of trying to develop more prospects than we ultimately are going to pursue and be successful with. And in a second, I'll come back to a couple tools on research. The second is prospecting and cultivating. So in this stage, based on the research, we're trying to figure out whether or not these candidates have a reasonable probability, and then we're trying to cultivate the relationships. Now, some of you probably know, but what's important is in foundation land, it's really important at this stage to understand enough about this funder to know, do they accept open unsolicited proposals, or are they invitation only? Some of you probably know a lot of major foundations are what they call invitation only. And so that tells us a whole lot about how we're going to have to cultivate. Others allow unsolicited proposals. And if they do, then they're going to usually tell you how often and what's the process, and that's the important thing to figure out at that point. That's a big fork in the road for us. So if it's, I'll call it door A, is invitation only, then we know at that point we have to figure out a way to get invited. And that usually then is a long courting stage where we're trying to figure out who are the actors, our key players on the staff of that foundation, a program officer or a director of programming or somebody that's key. And we usually go through a process of doing what I call 360, looking at all of our relationships and whether it's our board, our staff, our allies, and trying to figure out if we have a relationship that can give us an introduction to a key program officer. Ideally, we're trying to get a warm introduction so we don't have to do a cold call. But in the last resort, if we can't get one of those, that's what we're going to do. We're going to just present ourselves and try to win a meeting. And they know that. They're all geared up for that. So they're going to be careful to take just not every meeting that they get asked to take, but they also understand that's the process. And a lot of these staff then will receive us. So that's door A, and that's a cultivation process. Door B is I'll call it the accept unsolicited proposals. And if we're going to go through door B, then we're just going to do a lot of research to try to figure out, do we fit what they take, what they fund, and what's the best way to sort of shape our proposal, how much to ask for, all these kind of questions are the questions we're trying to figure out at that point. So if we go through door B or door A, we're hoping to get to this next step, letter of intent, concept paper. And a door A, which is the invitation only, we're trying to get the program officer or a staff member to invite a concept paper or invite a full proposal. Most of them won't invite the full proposal in the first ask, but some will. But most of them will say, why don't you send me a concept paper or some kind of outline? And so we're trying to, at that point, entice them into saying, yes, they want to fund us and they want a full proposal. If it's a foundation that receives unsolicited proposals, At this point, we're going right to the proposal phase, and we're going to write a full proposal and make a pitch. Now, of course, timing, the time frames or the scheduling of these foundations are super important. They all usually will tell you right on their website all the things I'm talking about. They'll say, we accept proposals once a year or 4 times a year, and they'll tell you what dates they are. So we try to figure out what's the cycle of this foundation. And if it's an invitation only, we try to get the program officer to tell us what are your proposal dates, how often, what's our deadline. So that's telling us like what's the possibility and what to aim for in terms of gearing up their effort and what schedule do we have to work on to be successful. Then you're finally into this full proposal stage. And that's what a lot of us think about as the grant writing stage when you're now trying to win the whole thing. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the budget piece of this, because then the budget becomes critical too, how to form your budget. And if you get then the yes, then you're moving to this next stage of implementation. And of course, what's important there is execution and meet the deliverables or whatever you committed to. And then the last stage is reporting. And I would just add a word under reporting, say stewardship. In this stage, you're trying to both make sure that you're executing, you're reporting to the funder that per their guidelines, what you promised to do and what your outcomes are, but you're also trying to cultivate the relationship, because you don't want to, what's easy for all of us in life is you get the big win and then you move on to the next thing and you forget to stay in contact with the program officer. So you want to make sure that you're staying close to them and you're building that relationship and you're responding to them as well as prompting them so the relationship is building, because that gives you an opportunity for a second grant, a follow-on grant, if that's possible with that funder. And in general, too, you just, of course, want to stay close to your funder and show your appreciation and be responsible and accountable to the grant they made. So that's what we call the stages of development. So now I'll go a little deeper on a couple of these stages on some key points. And I'll be watching my questions, too. I don't think I have any questions yet, right? Okay, no, I don't see any. Okay, so first of all, one of the things that we learned is we've got to have some staff dedicated to this work. And so the question in the beginning usually for all of us is, can we afford to have a full-time person or a part-time person working on development? And for me, when we first started trying to build up from zero, I couldn't. It was myself and a couple of staff members doing all our program work. So what I did is started out with a consultant. That way I could buy somebody's professional expertise, and I could afford it because we didn't have any extra money, so I was basically deficit funding it or investing. And I just bought like a quarter of someone's time. That got us into the business, and I had a professional that could start to do some of these stages as development. In the first 6 months, we got a couple of proposals out, we got turned down and didn't really get any successes. So that first 3 to 6 months was just investment money. And that at the time, feels like a stretch and it's hard. But as time went on, she started, this individual started getting some wins. We got our first few small grants in. And then we could fund the position, fund the consultant dollars and break even, and then start to get ahead. And over a course of a year, then we started getting a real plus position where we got more grants in than she cost in terms of the consulting fee. And then within 2 years, it got so strong that I brought her up to 50%. So I had her as half-time. And then several more years later, it got to full-time. And finally, then I just put a full-time development director on staff. And now we have several development staff. So my only point is that it does take professional staff. It helps to have it. But to get started, you don't have to go all the way with a full-time person. You can go with a consultant. But I wouldn't, I see a lot of chambers do is think that they just need to hire a grant writer. And my caution there is make sure that somebody is, if you're going to hire somebody as a consultant, they're a development consultant and they understand and have the ability to do the 6 stages of development. Because you don't want to just hire a grant writer, because then somebody else is going to have to do those other stages. Now, some of that is work you might do, and that's okay, but you just got to make sure that you don't just buy someone that can write proposals and no one's actually getting you to the proposal stage, because that's actually the highest skilled work, I would say, the first three phases. The next thing that we just found really important is what I'll call this, do these Venn diagrams of mission, what your mission is and what your funders are looking for. Because when you're starting to drive to raise these monies, as I'm sure a lot of you know, it's easy and tempting sometimes to start chasing dollars. And if you're in the chase, you start sometimes figuring out what does a funder want to fund, and next thing you know, you find yourself committing to doing things that aren't even what you set out to do, and they're not the mission of your chamber. But the opposite corollary is, I always sort of kid, you also aren't going to get hardly anybody that's going to fund you 100% for your mission. My kid is that only your mama does that. Your mom might give you $1 for just what you want, but almost everybody else on the planet is going to say, well, we kind of like what you do, but we have our own things that we want too. So the key here is when you're in those early stages of doing research and prospecting, at some point you want to just have a gut check moment where you say, okay, now I have a pretty good fix on what they fund, and I look at what I want to do, what our mission is, and is the Venn diagram pretty good? Is it 60, 70, 80%? If it gets in that range, 70, 80%, you're good. That's as good as it's going to get. Don't sit around and say, oh, if I could just talk them into 100%. Just remember what I told you. You can go back to your mama and see if mama will do that. But if she won't, you got to go with your 80%, because that's as good as it's going to get. Now, every once in a while, you will get a funder that will say, I'll fund you for general operating expenses because I just think you guys are so great. And obviously, take that in a second, and that's fabulous. But my caution is don't chase that, because it's an illusionary chase. It's just not going to happen most cases. And the other opposite is if it's only like 10 or 20% Venn diagram, and you'd have to create a whole new set of programming and effort, then it's important to walk away and not be so desperate that you chase that dollar. So that's what we call the Venn diagram. Then the next thing that we found is really important, and I made a lot of mistakes on this, I would say, in my first 3 to 5 years, is how to construct these budgets. That's where the Venn diagram now turns into real dollars, which is now you're trying to figure out for the funder, how much money are they willing to give us, and how much money should I ask for, and how do I actually construct the budget. For the medium to large foundations, they usually require detailed budgets. So they're going to make you say how much you're going to put in for staffing, how much for communications, how much for overhead, how much for meetings, or whatever you're going to do. And constructing those budgets become really important for both the funder to get the grant, and for you to make sure you have the money for the money you need to operate. So you want to really get your accounting people involved. In our early years, that was one of my mistakes, is we would kind of construct the budgets and then I bring it back to our accounting director, and she would be like, why'd you do that? You didn't fund all the positions you need to fund, and we have more money over here than we need. So we realized that we had to do a better job of involving our accounting experts and construct the budget so that it really conformed to what we need the money for. And then negotiate with the funder if we can to have it shape the best we can to our own needs. Now, one thing I jumped over, I apologize, but I want to go back to it. On the prospecting side, the greatest tool you have available to you that's so wonderful because it's free is GuideStar. Some of you probably know it, but I want all of you to write this down. GuideStar, it's on the internet, probably guidestar.com or .org, I forget. And it's a free resource made available to anybody that gives the tax return of every foundation in the country. If you're a foundation in the United States, you have to file a tax return, just like we all have to. And GuideStar can get access to all of them and puts them up. So when we're doing our research, the first thing we usually do is we go to GuideStar and we pull down the tax return of that foundation. what's cool about that is that the foundation has to report in its tax return every grant it gave away in the prior year, in the tax year. So what you get to see is that they gave $25,000 to your local Boys and Girls Club. They gave $10,000 to an after-school program. So you know right away who they give money to and how much money they give. So that tells you a ton about, oh, did they give money to stuff like you are trying to do or do, and also gives you a sense of the kind of giving levels they do, because you want to know, do they give grants of 5 or 10,000 or 50 or 100? Then ideally, if it's really a high priority prospect for you, it's worth it to pull down 2 or 3 years of GuideStar, because then you get to see, let's say that you have already determined that this is a real value, high value prospect. You want to see, do they refund grantees? Because if you pull up their return for 3 straight years and you see that they funded the Boys and Girls Club every single year, then that tells you something super valuable, which is they tend to refund grantees. If they don't, then you know that it still may be worth going after, but you're not going to get a multi-year grant. So we would, when we're doing our research, if we see one that funds repeatedly, we just rank it as a much higher prospect, much more valuable prospect, because we know once we get our first grant, we may get a second grant, a third grant, and so on and so forth. So that's just really important information. Another thing you're going to learn from the GuideStar is, back to my 360, do they give money to people like you? And do you know people in those organizations they're giving money to that may give you a lead, may give you an introduction? So you're learning more about their world, the world that they give money to. You're also just learning about like what their giving patterns are, what they value. What's kind of funny is you look on the website and a foundation will say, this is what we care about, this is what we fund. And that's important. But then when you look at the 990, it doesn't always match one for one. Sometimes you'll see some of the things they say, but you'll see some other things you're like, wow, that's a little different than what the website says, or it goes a little farther, it has a different twist. So it's just part of your research that's rounding out the full picture. Because there's nothing like watching someone's actions. It's like the difference between when your mama said to you, don't look at what they say, look at what they do. And their 990 is what they did. No matter what spin they say, this is actually how they wrote their checks. So that's super valuable for you. And for any experienced development professional, that's like their Bible. They go to GuideStar and they pull the 990s. Now, one limitation I would just say is 990s are yesterday's news, because a 990 is a rear view mirror. It says what their most recent tax return that's filed. So right now, you would see the 990s for 2017 and 2018. You would not see 2019, and you may not even see some 2018s, depending on how current their tax returns are. So it's a little bit old. And if a foundation got a brand new president or did a new strategic plan and there's a pivot, then the 990 is a little dated, because they could be going in a different direction and things may have changed. So you just have to recognize the limitation of a 990. It's always historical information. So why don't you keep going, Emily? So the next question is, where do you find the money? And this is where I would say, have fun with this. Put on your Sherlock Holmes personality. Most of us get frustrated. We kind of think, well, there's a very limited world. There's only a few foundations in our town, or a few sort of major donors, and we've already gone to them like 10 times and they've turned us down, or we're getting something from them already, and how could we get any more? And I had that sense myself. And then what I was coached to do by professionals is really be open-minded, that the money is in a lot of places. There's a lot of rocks to turn over, and have a real broad view of going out and searching for the dough. So let me just give you a high level. When we think about where to find the money, we of course think about corporate sponsors. I'm sure a lot of you already get that, and some of that is C6 money. But corporate sponsors are used to funding traditional chamber activities. So they're funding like your lobby trips or your breakfasts with politicians, but they may not be funding your stuff, educational work or other kinds of work that you might be doing. So just keep in mind that even though your C6 is getting corporate sponsorship, there may be money on the table that is more unique money for your kind of C3 type work. The second thing is on the foundation side, some of the big corporations give money through a corporate foundation. So when we think about corporate money, we think about two types basically. Money that comes through their marketing or their community affairs department, and money that comes through their foundation. And this only applies to the major corporations like Fortune 500 will sometimes have a foundation like JP Morgan Chase or Citibank, AT&T to name a few. And that's a little different money because they'll have a professional foundation staff and they behave a little bit like a traditional foundation, but they still have a corporate feel. They're kind of an in-between. So we find a lot of money in that bucket, the corporate foundation bucket. The next one, and I'd say is the biggest one for us, is foundations. That was the biggest new money that the LA Chamber achieved. In foundations, we think of big institutional foundations. Those are large, the Ford Foundation, or small family foundations. And when we first started, we got our first set of grants through the Family Foundation world. Those were $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. Some of you probably get it. That's more of an individual, wealthy donor who set up a small family foundation. Those are good grants. They're usually less programmatic. They're more unrestricted. They often, once you get in them, you get these repeat grants I talked about earlier. So don't walk by those. But they're very relationship driven. They're much less than the big foundations that are going to look a lot about strategy and do you do what we want, and they're going to be very structured and professional. Most of the family foundations, they mostly fund the people they like. So the cultivation in this case is mostly a lot of lunches, a lot of breakfast, a lot of hanging out, your board members, other people that are have relationships. So in that case, we just spend a lot of time on the personal side. On the traditional foundations, they're much more professional, as I said, and so that's much more of looking at the way they fund and the kind of work they expect and building credibility that you can deliver on the kind of stuff they care about. The next one is fee for service. Surprisingly, there's more fee for service out there than most of us see. This is like providing supports and services to whatever your mission is and to some partner that the partner cares about, or the funder cares about. So for us, it's things like we get some of this as public dollars, where we're providing technical assistance, say, to a community college or a school on internship programs or how to build partnerships. It could be a private foundation that wants us to do TA, technical assistance to some of their grantees, how to build corporate relationships. So this comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And some fee for service is not worth taking because it takes you too far off mission. But there's other times fee for service is the way they want to give you the money and you take it. Thank you very much. We'll provide expertise because it's what we're doing anyway. So that's a type of money, not so much the source, because the source can come from a lot of different places. The next one is this government funding. Some of you may not take any government money. I know that's it's a chamber by chamber policy. We've decided we will, and it's been pretty amazing. We get federal grants, we get state grants, we get local grants. Some are competitive, some are non-competitive, our formula. And I'll just say in that area, it's largely a question of are they funding the kind of stuff we do? That's back to the Venn diagram. And can we maintain the integrity of the chamber, LA Chamber's C6 mission, so we're not compromising any of the sort of perceptions or reality of an independent organization that advocates to sometimes local city council. Is it legitimate work that we can stand for? And we find that we can do that all the time. But there are times when we walk by this money too. Now, the other thing about government funding that we learned is it's cash flow horrible. In other words, it pays very, very slow. So we've had a few years where we actually won some very sizable government grants, but we got in a pickle because our cash flow got too negative. So one of our lessons was to make sure that our funding is really diversified. So if we take a government grant, we got to make sure that our private funds are the ones I already talked about, foundation grants and corporate sponsors, we're strong enough to balance out the cash flow. Because we've had some years where the overall revenue looked good, but we had negative cash flow because too much of our revenue was in the government bucket. So then we just rebalance it. We pursue more of our private sector funding, and we are more reserved about pursuing public dollars. But having said that, it's a great set of resources. And for us, it's probably about a third to 40% of all the money we raise are in one of these public buckets. And then after that, there's this miscellaneous stuff. Sometimes we have CBO partners that are re-granting to us. They get funds from somebody that we can't get from, but they're doing similar work, and we end up getting a re-grant from them. And I'll just invite then, as I get questions too, maybe people have some other sources they want to throw out there. But my main point here is go on an investigation and don't assume that there's just no more opportunities and you've tapped them all, because you've never tapped them all. There's always more resources out there than you imagined. So that's a super high level of a whole bunch of things. Let's see if we can stimulate some questions. I can expand on a few things, but I want to pause and invite some folks to ask a few questions. So do we have any questions, Emily, in the chat box yet?
I have not seen any in the chat box yet, but folks, please either raise your hand to ask a question and I will unmute you, or please type your question into the question or chat panel.
So while people are thinking about this, one of the questions that several of you gave us is, what do I do if I don't have a foundation? So for those of you who don't have a 501c3 foundation, here are some of the things that we have found from other chambers, and we do a little bit of them ourselves. One is look to see if there's somebody in your community that does fiscal sponsorship. In almost every region in the country we've seen, there are some organizations that will act as a fiscal host, they sometimes say, or a sponsor of a grant. Community foundations do this a lot. So if you have a community foundation, they could be an option, but there could be other entities. And that's usually just doing your research and asking around and saying who might sponsor an organization that does not have a C3, but does have a C3 kind of body of work, and will be, in that case, they will be the fiscal agent, and they'll make the formal request on your behalf, and they sometimes will charge you a fee. When we first started, United LA did not have a C3, 501c3, so we found an organization in LA. It's called Community Partners. And Community Partners incubates, they call themselves an incubation organization, incubates small projects that are pre-501c3, and you apply to become a project, and we got approved, and then they became our fiscal agent and applied to our first round of grants, and they charged us, I think it was about 8%. Most of them will charge you some kind of fee, 6, 8, 10%. To do your accounting for you. They provide the 501c legal structure and sometimes give you a little TA and help. So one is to find a fiscal sponsor. The next one could be to develop some kind of strategic partnership. I'll call it a C3 ally. Often you'll have a partner that you're already doing stuff with, and they're a C3, and you just talk to them about a formal partnership, where you're going to help them win some money maybe they're not currently getting, or the two of you kind of collaborate to go get some new money together, and you're going to be a sub-grantee of them, and they're going to be the direct applicant, but you negotiate your positioning so you get a good share of that deal. So we do that already, even though we have a C3, And I've seen others do that very successfully. A lot of chambers have a strong partner, and they are getting their grants through their partner. So that's the second option.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, David. Sorry, we have a few questions ready to go. Sorry to interrupt
Great.
you.
Thank you, Emily. I'm glad you did.
What are your thoughts on how small and medium chambers can compete for big corporate sponsorships?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's no such thing as a small and medium chamber. In your community, you are the big chamber. And so, first of all, I wouldn't get psyched out by that. I think for a corporate, for any corporation that has, let's say the banks are a good example, they have branches in your hometown. Within that hometown, you're what matters to them. So you, in most cases, you've got a good shot to say, I'm the big fish in this small pond. So my advice is, first of all, just try to size up for that corporate sponsor. You know, what are their priorities? What do they give money for? And regardless of the size of your town or city, for that corporation, if they're doing business in your town, then you're significant to them. And I think you just go straight at it and try to make the case that you can make a big difference in that town or city that your chamber resides in, that's relevant to the market of that company. They're just simply looking at, this is in the way we're organized, this is the region in which we give money out, and this includes this city or this town, and they've allocated money, and you want to say, hey, that's our money. I want to go after and get it.
All right, thank you. Next question. Going back to hiring a development person or grant writer, did you pay them a percentage of the grant received?
I didn't. I know I've heard some of my colleagues do that, and I suppose that there are some grant writers or development people that are willing to do that. I've talked to a few of them. So I think that's a legitimate option. I think my bias is, I don't want a person to be like worrying about negotiating with me on what that rate is, and I don't want the funder to worry about that I have like a commissioned salesperson that I've sort of sicked on them, because that's almost like a commissioned approach. I'd rather just say, I'm committed to doing this, and I'm going to make an investment, and I'm willing to engage in a professional on that basis. And then have control over who we're going after. At that point, you're probably going to give over to that person some of the influence over who you go after, because they don't want to go after people that they feel like they don't have any shot. And I wouldn't want to negotiate with my own consultant. But having said that, I mean, if you have somebody really strong and that's the way they want to do things, and they have a track record of doing it, I mean, it could be a more efficient way to do it, and it hedges your risk. But I didn't do it that way. And I do think, Alicia, we had a few examples we've heard people do that with sort of like a percentage of a grant yield.
I have, but it's been the minority.
Yeah, just a few examples.
Yeah.
So I think I'd do it with caution and eyes wide open. It has its own risks. It kind of looks good on the front end because you don't spend money, but so it might be like a pay me now, pay me later kind of reality.
Next question. Do you have any other tips for researching prospects other than GuideStar?
Sure. So of course, the first obvious thing in this day and age is internet. I mean, on the internet, you can find out just unbelievable amount of stuff. So we would tend to Google like crazy, but we're not just randomly Googling. We would be Googling, aren't I a product of Google?
Mm-hmm.
We would be searching on the internet on whatever browser you want to use, something that is keyed off of some keywords that are important, like what are the kind of things we're trying to fund, what are some of the people involved, what are people we know. We're triangulating our research between what we learn in person and what we can find out on the internet. And what I mean by that is as we're out at mixers and we're at events, we'd be asking questions. We'd be trying to meet people, learn about, hang out where funders hang out. And then we'd go back and do research. Oh, we just met so-and-so family foundation at an event, or we found out that a board member knows so-and-so. Then we go back and do the research. Then we go back and try to get in a meeting with them again. So we're kind of interplaying between first party research in real time at events and in direct contact with internet-based research. The next thing we would do a lot of is look at websites of people that do stuff like we do. So this is one of these obvious things that once I kind of explain it to you, you'd say, well, gosh, yeah, of course. But we forget it a lot of times, and I do too, by the way. And so what I mean by this is there's always in your community at least some people that are doing stuff like you do. Or it might not even be in your community. It might be in your state or your region. Let's say it's an internship program. Let's say it's early education. Let's say it's higher ed, reform. If you look up on the internet of organizations that are already doing stuff like that, or even similar, doesn't have to be exactly the same, even remotely similar, usually they'll tell you right on their website who they get all their money from. It's usually on the about, or there's a little funder button, and they're proud to tell you. They want to say it because they want to brag to. They want to say to their funders, "I'm giving credit," which is what you should do too, by the way. But they're revealing who gives them money. So that's one thing we would do is we just go look at that and we'd, oh shoot, I never thought about going after that foundation, but they give money to that other organization that I compete with or that I work with, whatever. The other thing is you can pull the 990 of that nonprofit. So the next thing we would do is we see a nonprofit that does programs like we are, and then we pull their 990. So you can get 990s of foundations. You can also get 990s of other 501c3s like yourself. And by the way, keep in mind, everybody gets to see your 990. So that's the way the world works. If they're all going to look at your 990, you should be looking at theirs. All's fair. So you can look at their 990, and then they have to say in their 990 where they get all their money. So if they aren't telling you everything on their website, then you can round out that information on their 990. Because you don't have, the website is obviously optional, and they may not tell you the smaller ones or certain key ones for whatever set of reasons. So then you go to the 990 and you can round out the story. So I'd say those are three big things, but mostly in the prospecting, it is I guess I would just blanket this because I know I don't remember all the things we do. It's a real journey of curiosity. The key is to be curious and just ask questions and be like Sherlock Holmes or be like Columbo and be a doofus and just bumble around and ask for help. Ask your board, ask your bosses, ask your friends, ask your relatives. And what's amazing is these leads will turn up from the oddest places. You do formal research and just get so much, not too much, whatever. And all of a sudden you'll get some weird thing because you asked enough questions. And all of a sudden an interesting prospect pops onto your radar screen. And then you go start researching it. Usually then you got to do a bunch of research to actually figure it out. A lot of them are dead ends. But that's okay because it only takes a few winners to be worth it. So Emily, are there other questions?
Oh, you have about 4 more.
Oh, Lordy B. Okay, here we go. I'll pace myself.
You're very popular today. When you have a meeting with a potential funder, how important is it to have print collateral produced and provided at the meeting? We know it's not the brochure that will close the deal, but is it needed to have?
Wow, that is such a doggone good question. Thank you to the person who asked it. I have no idea. I ask myself that question all the time. Well, so some of the things we think about, of course, the degree of preparation overall, including print material, is going to be in proportion to the value of the prospect. If this is a big time prospect that gives out huge dollars, 100,000 or more, they're a repeat funder, they give out multi-year grants, then of course I'm going to put a huge amount of prep into that meeting. If they're a $5,000 funder and I think it's a long shot, I'm going to go in with my standard materials because it just isn't worth it to, spend 2 weeks of prep and put together. If it's a big time prospect, I might do tailored materials. I won't just have my standard brochure. I might do a tailored thing that says all the things I did last year that fit what they want. If it's a medium funder, I probably would just use my standard piece. So it's in proportion to the upside giving capacity and my sense of probability of winning. And the higher that is, the more I would do customized materials, or at least my best shiny print. And the lower it is, the more I would just use my standard materials. The materials are not going to win it. What's going to win it is your interaction. But the materials still show something about you. It's your chance to show your track record and give credibility. It's the thing they're going to walk away with. After you have your meeting, if you wow them, which you all will, you have only wowed them in the moment. When they walk away, that wow moment fades quickly. And they don't remember all the emotional elevation you accomplished in the moment. So you do want something that carries the day when they go back to their office and they reflect and they talk to other people around them that they have to get support from. The materials will act as a point of thread, a through point into that post-meeting moment. So that is a good purpose of the materials, is you want them to be attached to that emotional wow memory, and then also have some tangible materials that can go back to somebody else and say, wow, this is a strong organization. So they serve a purpose, but they won't win the moment. Next question, Emily.
All right, next question. How important is persistence when seeking funding? Can you also talk more about your reporting strategy, only what is required or more?
Wow, those are two really good ones too. So persistence, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to tell you what you don't already know and your mama and dada taught you. Persistence is everything. It's everything. But there's a point when you're just a damn annoyance too. So I would say err on the side of persistence. I think it's super important. One of the first best piece of advice I got from my board chair 20 years ago, David Crippens, and I know nothing about this work that I'm talking about now. David did, is he said, David, get ready because you're going to have to turn down twice to get yes the third time. And what David was trying to teach me is for a lot of foundations, they're going to almost always turn you down the first time or two. And the important thing is to not be distracted by that. That does not mean you're not going to get money. It means you got to go through several rounds of failure. And they're gauging you and they're watching you and you're earning your stripes and you're working your way up the totem pole for them. So in that case, persistence is everything. If you just get discouraged your first turn down, you just walked by money that might have been gettable in your second or third round. But plus we're all gauging that. How passionate are you? How disciplined are you? How determined are you? All those things you're being scored for all the time. So a persistent person is showing that commitment and passion to the work, their self-discipline and determination to stay after it. Just as long as you don't go to the point of annoyance. So you just that's just again the skills you all know, just reading people well and realize when you've moved from persistence into being a pest. And that's hard to do, I'd say, in this land. I would say we almost never feel like we go to that space. On reporting, for the big foundations, they're usually pretty clear. They're going to tell you, I want 3 to 5 pages. I want it in these boxes. For them, give them what they want. If you give them more than they want, it just kind of pisses them off. Sorry for that French. Kind of antagonizes them. But for the smaller foundations, they may really like it if you kind of give them some extra love and you give some pictures and brochures of events that they helped you fund. So I would say they're going to usually tell you, just ask clarifying questions. They'll be pretty clear with you. Yeah, more is better. We really like to have it. Or no, we really just you want to give us 3 pages and that's it. And then I would just follow whatever they tell you. Next question, Emily.
All right, last question. How do you identify national foundations that may fit our needs? Is there a good place to research national foundations that we may approach? The foundation community in our state is fairly small, so we don't have tons of experience.
Well, so first of all, again, just go on the internet. There's a list of the top, I think it's top 50 education foundations, top 50 corporate foundations. We just run that list, every so often. So most of this information is very public. It's easy to get information on the internet about who the biggest funders are in the United States in any type of work, whether it's education, it's health, social justice. You can find out just through good internet research who the biggest funders are, both traditional foundations and national foundations. Now, once you see that list, all you know now is a name. It doesn't really tell you much more than, hey, they have a lot of money and they give a lot of money away. The list will only say a little bit about what kind of money they give away. So then you just have to go back to what I mentioned earlier, and then you have to go into the research game and do a bunch of research. Again, there are 990s. The big national foundations, they tell you everything you need to know because they have to. So between their website and their tax return, you can figure out what you need to know because they have to reveal it all, and it's all publicly available. As far as like, do they give money for the kind of stuff you do? Now, will they give you money for what you want to get? That's tougher for the national because they've got a professional staff whose job mainly is to avoid you. So they're very good at not letting you talk to them. And so that's your challenge too, is like getting beyond the sort of wall that they put up to try to get triangulated into them. And that's the chase you can win. It's a chase we win all the time. But it's also a chase we lose all the time, having said that. So, you just have to go into that chase with fortitude and persistence, as one of you asked earlier, for national foundations. Amy, are there any other questions?
No other questions at this time. Alicia, would you like to talk about next steps now?
Sure. I just wanted to make an offer. If anyone is interested in a one-on-one consultation, the ACCE team has a number of consultants who can schedule a 30-minute call with you and talk through your own development and sustainability plan. So shoot me an email if you would like to set up one of those one-on-one consultations, abell@acce.org. And also, if any of you are joining us in Long Beach in July for the annual ACCE convention, we're going to have a bit of a deeper dive, a Development 102, if you will, featuring David Rattray again and David Atkinson from the Kentucky Chamber. So please look out for the date and time, which will be announced shortly on ACCE's website for that development deep dive at convention. Emily, I'll turn it back to you to close.
All right, thank you. So thank you everyone for attending. Just a reminder that the webinar recording and presentation slides and materials are available on ACCE's website in about 24 to 48 hours. If your question was unanswered, all questions will be answered individually. If you have additional questions, please feel free to email me at ecounts@acce.org, and I will make sure your question is answered. Thank you very much for attending today.
And thank you, Emily, for doing this for us.
Thank you, and the webinar will now close.